Before we start this video, a large thank you to James Ransom, Megumi, and So Sad Hannah for their support on Patreon. I hope you guys enjoy the video. And of course, an immense thank you to Halo Burner and Ryan Belland for their immense and continued support of the channel this month on Patreon. I hope you enjoy the video, gentlemen. Hello everybody, today by request of the Patreon members we're going to go over how to actually freeze a character in place, including their animations, and how I would implement a freezing effect over their body. So let's go to the character network manager. I'm going to copy the is frostbitten bool here. I'm going to change this from is frostbitten to is frozen. I'm doing this because you might not necessarily want these two things to be the same thing. So if you want to apply the freezing effect while you're frostbitten, you can just go ahead and use that. But over here on the frostbite effect script, I'm going to basically add some more logic right below here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it so whenever you're frostbitten, you're automatically frozen, but you can put this wherever you want. So I'm going to do this by saying character network manager is frozen.value is equal to true. So what are we looking to accomplish with this? Well, let's make an on is frozen function first, and we're going to make this trip whenever the is frozen is changed. So we're going to say on is frozen changed. And again, this is not an Elden Ring. This was a request, and it is related enough that I feel like it was cool to cover because it's honestly a feature I wish was in Souls games instead of just the regular frostbite mechanic, but I digress. So we're going to say if frozen 1, we want to stop the animation. So you don't want your character to play any more animations. We want to freeze the current animation in place. And we can do both of these with one call, and I'll show you what it is in a moment. So we're going to say freeze animation in place so no further animation can play. So basically, wherever point you're at in the animation, it stops right there. And 3, apply a frozen material and VFX to the whole character. So we're going to come down here and say if you're unfrozen, all you want to do is continue the animation from wherever you were at when you were frozen. And obviously remove any frozen materials and effects. We're going to do a thing where we actually use a whole material on the character, but I'm going to go over why there's a slightly better method, and I'll go over why I don't specifically do in this video. The short version is I'm not competent enough to design a shader for this, and I don't want to make a tutorial on something I'm not knowledgeable about because there's better resources out there. But we're going to say if is frozen.value, and then we can just come in here and say else. So if is frozen.value, what do we want to do? Well, we want to stop the animation wherever it is, and we want to freeze the animation in place. I'm just going to put these comments in their proper statement. So we can accomplish 1 and 2 right now with one call. I'm going to show you. It's very simple. So I'm going to come in here and say character.animator.speed is equal to 0. That's it. This will take every animation layer on your animator and stop everything where it's at exactly. So the second one, apply material. Well, this is a bit more difficult. So we're going to say character effects manager.play frozen effects. This doesn't exist yet. We're going to make it. And it's not difficult per se. I'm sorry, that's the wrong word. It's going to be a bit more lengthy than just setting a simple speed variable to 0 for this one. Now, else we're going to set speed back to 1, and we don't need anything else because we're going to check in this function for whenever we become unfrozen and then apply what we need to apply there. So over on the character effects manager, let's first make a header, and we're going to call this renderers. Now, what do we need here? The idea is to compile an array of every skin mesh renderer on your character, but also every mesh renderer. And some of you might be asking, well, what's the difference? Typically, a skin mesh renderer is something that's animated, and a mesh renderer will be like a static object. So if you're holding a sword, 9 times out of 10, it's probably a mesh renderer. But if your character is wearing armor, it's most definitely almost a skin mesh renderer. So let's make 2 private arrays for these because we want to include our weapons or anything we're holding in the thing that's being frozen, unless you don't, in which case don't include that if you just want to not include your weapons. I'll make a comment in here for frozen. We'll make a public void called play frozen effects. And we're going to open this up, and what we're going to do basically just use this to run logic for a coroutine. But let's make some pseudocode here. And first I'm going to put a warning. If you are using an animation IK system like I have, temporarily disable it. So otherwise, if you have, for example, look IK where your head is tracking somebody, their head will continue to track while you're frozen, even though your animation speed is at 0, because IK is typically handled separately and will move the model after the animation has been calculated and accounted for. So if you're using any kind of IK, you want to pause it right here and resume it after you're frozen. So just disable the component, if you will, and re-enable it when you're no longer frozen. So I'm going to make a header up here for frozen, and I make a private coroutine called frozen coroutine. Okay. Actually, I'm going to move that up a little bit. I just don't want to blow the renders. I want the renders to be the last thing. I don't know why. Sebastian brain. So we're going to say skin mesh renders equals get component children skin mesh renders equals get components and children mesh renders. This will get all the skin mesh renders and mesh renders in your model. So we're going to say private enumerator activate frozen VFX coroutine, and then we're going to open up some curly bracers, and then I am going to make this require a material called frozen material, and this is going to be the material we apply to every skin mesh render and mesh render in your character to make them look like they're frozen. So I'm just going to say yield return null for now, so that stops giving me an error. I'm going to say if frozen coroutine is not equal null, stop coroutine frozen coroutine, and then we're going to say frozen coroutine equals start coroutine, and we can pass activate frozen VFX coroutine. Now the frozen material, this does not exist yet either. We don't really have one, so I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to go over to my world utility manager, and I'm going to make a variable for it. And again, you could make it public and then get it that way, but I believe I was using this to showcase getters a long time ago, so just to stay with the same conventions as the scripts, I'll make it a serializable variable that's private, and we can use a function to get it. That way you can't accidentally change it. And this is something you should do, especially when working with a group, because it makes it so you can't accidentally override this variable. But if you're working solo, it is definitely a lot less risky and troublesome. So we're going to say public material get frozen material, and then we're just going to return the frozen material variable we have up there. Okay, very cool. Let's save that. Now if I go over to the character effects manager, I can pass the world utility manager.instance.get frozen material, and I can do some brackets here like that, and we're good to go. Okay, now under here in activate frozen VFX coroutine, we're going to say list. We're going to make a variable list here for original skin mesh render materials, and we're going to say this is equal to a new list. And then we're going to make one for a list of materials for our original mesh renderer materials. And what we're going to do, if some of you haven't caught on right now, is we're going to basically iterate through all of our renderers and save all of our original materials to a list. And then we're going to iterate through them again and change them all to the new frozen material. And while we're frozen, we're going to simply wait. And then when we become unfrozen, we're going to iterate back through them and switch them back to the original materials. So why are we doing this like this? This is basically just going to store what we already have in a list. It's going to wait until we become unfrozen, and then we're going to go back to the list and reset them to what they originally were. This is a pretty simple solution, so we're also going to save a few things on frozen too. For example, bool rotation status on frozen is equal to character.character network manager. Whoops, sorry, wrong project. This is not Nephilim. Character.character locomotion manager can rotate. Then we're going to save can move and is performing action. Why are we doing this? When you're frozen, we want to remember what your movement variables were when you become unfrozen, so you continue in that set. For example, if I get frozen in the middle of an attack, I can't move or rotate. So when I become unfrozen, I don't want to be able to move or rotate instantly. I want to be able to go back to whatever I was doing so the animation can finish off what it was trying to do. So basically, if I get frozen in the middle of an action, I'm going to come back into that action and I won't be able to move or rotate until the action is complete. So let's do the same thing, like I said, for can move and is performing action. And I'm just going to make a comment here. We want to save what our character, we'll say character status. We're going to say save what our character's status was before we were frozen. And then we can apply the those statuses back when we become unfrozen. So we're going to say character.character locomotion manager can move is equal to false. We're going to say can rotate is equal to false. And we're going to say is performing action is equal to true. This stops us from moving, stops us from rotating, and stops us from queuing up or performing any other action right now. Okay, very good. So now we have our movement frozen. We have our status of our movement beforehand set and saved. So we can now apply this when we become unfrozen. Now the next step is to actually iterate through all of our known skin mesh renderers and mesh renderers. And we're going to apply the new frozen material. And you might be wondering, why do I get the skin mesh renderers every time we become frozen? Why don't I just get on a wake? And that's because for some models, obviously, what if you're changing armors on the fly or weapons, etc., you might have to change the list and the list might be different. So we're going to say for each skin mesh renders.length, if it's I continue, it shouldn't be. You actually probably don't even need to put that there because this is being called in the same frame and it wouldn't get anything that's a null reference, but force of habit, I always put it there for a check. You don't need it there in this case though. I'm going to say skin mesh renders I.material is equal to instantiate frozen material. We're choosing to instantiate it as a copy because if you have anything on the material that will be changed, any like variables or whatever, it will change it on all materials unless you instantiate it. This is a local version of that material, so then you're safe to change anything you want. So again, we're going to say mesh render.material is equal to instantiate frozen material. So take both of your renderers arrays, iterate through them, and apply the material on each of those renderers as the new frozen material in instantiated version. Then we're going to simply say while the character is frozen, yield return null, which simply means just wait, keep running this loop until we become unfrozen. Then when we become unfrozen, we're going to do a for loop within a for loop. So this is a little bit maybe confusing looking to some of you. I know it was for me to wrap my head around the first time I saw one. But we're going to do a loop of all of our skin mesh renderers. And then for inside of our skin mesh renderers, I'm just going to get rid of this null check here. Don't need this. We're going to do the autocomplete. This is such a weird way to say a for loop. This is what happens now with new Visual Studios. I got global system int 32 instead of just int when I hit tab twice. Anyway, we're going to do a for loop in here inside the for loop of the skin mesh renderers. And we're going to do a for loop comparing. Let me get rid of this, this null check. We're going to say int j, and we're going to compare original skin mesh materials. So the original materials list we saved, we're going to go through that. And for all of our renderers, and then for all of our materials, we're going to assign the skin mesh renderers i.material is equal to original skin mesh render materials j. So it's basically going to go back through the order of the materials that you saved and reapply them to their proper renders. And we do the same thing for our mesh renders. Now, I mentioned before there's a better way to do this. What is that? The better way to do this, if you're privy to the knowledge of making shaders and using things like the visual effects graph, is to set up a shader where you can have a variable for the frozen amount, and then it would layer a texture over your character, and you could basically turn a value from 0 to 1 and then make that apply the freezing effect. I don't have any knowledge, or rather extensive knowledge in visual effects graph, so I don't want to do that because I'm not the one to show you that when there's way better resources out there. I have a very rudimentary level of skill in that. I've done a few things, but not enough that I want to make a video on it. So that is a better way to do it. If you have the knowledge of how to do stuff in shader graph, you should definitely do it that way. This way isn't bad. This way is totally fine, but you have more control over, I'm going to say more properties if you do things with visual effects graph, because you can make other things besides freezing, like blood amount, dirt, all that stuff is really cool. Now, the last step is to set your characters can rotate, can move, and is performing action back to whatever they were up here when we became frozen. And that's basically it. So I'm going to make some comments here just to clarify this. We're changing all the characters' materials to the frozen material, right? And then down here, we're waiting until we're unfrozen, and then we're going through all of the skin mesh renderers, and we're putting back our materials to the unfrozen material. And that's basically it. So down here again, and again, this is a Nephilim thing, so this was tested in Nephilim, and if there's something I'm overlooking, because usually with these things I post videos on, I give it more of an extensive look, and I tailor it to the Elden Ring series because it's for Elden Ring, it's a bit different, but a few patrons asked me to showcase this. So if there's anything that's weird about this or unclear, let me know. I can go over it. I'm going to test this in the video, obviously make sure it works. So we're going to say, is there an alternative to changing materials? As I said before, yes, you could make a shader with a frozen property, and you could add a layer of ice, like a texture, over the material, and then if you basically change the value from 0 to 1, it will apply a freezing effect. This is the way I would do it, and I think in the future I'm going to learn how to do it this way, but this other way works just as well. You just a little bit more effort looping through your character and applying the material. Okay, let's save that. Let's go back to the frostbite effect here, and now we're going to, on the remove effect, set is frozen to true. I'm going to say if character is owner, is frozen, that value is equal to false. Cool, let's save. Now I'm going to go into the project, go to my materials. I'm going to make a very ugly frozen material. I'm not going to spend any time on this whatsoever. Just going to make it, emissive, and give it a bit of brightness. And again, I encourage you to take your time. The example I showed in Nephilim obviously is going to look very different. I took the time to make the VFX for that. I added some smoke effects to the character, the same way I showed you how to add poison effects earlier when they become frozen. And I made the material a little bit reflective and added a little bit of a texture to it with the ice. But this is just going to be me setting a color to blue because it looks kind of like ice, giving it a bit of emission so it's a bit more brighter and glows a little. And that's good, just to show you that the logic itself works. I'm not the guy to be teaching you about graphics. That's not a field I am extremely proficient in. I'm just going to go over the logic of the functionality. So let's go over to the World Utility Manager and drop in our material. And then we can apply that material when it's frozen, but we need to call this on is frozen change. So go to your player manager and your AI character manager and say player network manager, or go to your base class if you're doing that, and say is frozen dot on value changed plus equals player network manager on is frozen change. Make sure you do not forget to unsubscribe on the on network despawn, like so. Copy and paste and change the plus to a minus. So do the same thing on your other AI character or your base class, like I said. So basically, what this is going to do is going to stop your character from moving, going to change the materials to a frozen material, and then when they become unfrozen, it's then going to allow them to move and change the materials back. Pretty straightforward, if it works. We're going to test it in a moment to make sure. I'm going to paste this here, minus equals. Very good, save. Okay, I forgot something in the skin mesh render. Come back here and make sure you say original materials.add. When you're applying the frozen material, the line before you apply it, make sure you save the original material by saying original material mesh materials.add and instantiate a copy of that material. It's a very important part, otherwise you won't be able to change back to your non-frozen material. So make a comment here, instantiate a copy if any properties on your material change. So for the same reason that you don't just save a material, if you're going to change anything about it, then instantiate a copy of it, don't just edit it directly. And do the same thing down here with your mesh render materials. So we have your skin mesh renders. Oh, I actually put mesh renders. Original skin mesh materials.add. And then down here should be original mesh materials.add. And then we're going to add the mesh renderers I. Okay, looks good. Now, I'm in the game here, and if I freeze my character, I'm going to attack first and do a mid animation. Boom, yes, it works. Now let's go double click in the effect. And let's make sure that this is actually becoming unfrozen. So I'm going to go here and type 3, 2, 1, boom. Yeah, cool, working as intended. That's weird. The frostbite particles aren't going away. Okay, over here on is frostbite changed. I realize I'm never setting the frostbite VFX variable, so just set the frostbite VFX variable to frostbite and then save it, and we should be good to go. And if you have it on a different class that you're editing, do the same thing. Say frostbite VFX on your player or character effects manager is equal to the frostbite game object that you instantiate. Alright, cool. Save. Now if I go in the game and I freeze my character again mid-action, boom, looks good. I'm going to go to the frostbite and set that to 0 or 1, and then it takes off. Cool. Now I'm still playing the effects. That's because I didn't set my frostbite status to false, but if I go here and untick this is frostbitten, that's my bad. Make sure you go back in your effect and set is frostbitten to false when you remove the frostbite effect. But there you go, guys, working as intended. This will now give you an ability to freeze your character, mid animation, do some damage. Now what you can further do to expand upon this, and if you want me to cover it in a video, let me know. If not, I will move on, because there's another thing you can do where if you attack the character a time after they're frozen, you can make it so they become unfrozen. And optionally also, you can also make it so if the character dies while being frozen, they burst into a pile of ice cubes. So this is something that will be fun to try on your own, but if you want me to cover it, I certainly can. Just let me know. If not, that will be all from me, and I hope you have a very, very lovely weekend. I have some holidays coming up soon, so I'm going to be very, very away from office. If you guys send me an email or something that I'm a while getting back to you, I apologize. If you were like myself and celebrate Christmas, then Merry Christmas. I hope you guys have a great break. Hope you guys get to see your family, have a wonderful time. And as always, an immense thank you to my patrons, the people who take the time to like and comment this video, and to the people who take the time to share this series via word of mouth. You have my sincerest gratitude. I'll see you guys next week.